Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have a very special guest on today. This is what one of his actual coaches or one of his individuals that he coaches said about him. The value per minute you provide is astronomical. This is one of his clients that he works with. And that's one of the reasons why I want to have him on. He is a performance coach for high performing CEOs, talking 8-figure, 9-figure, billion-dollar companies. He's worked with Apple, Microsoft, some very well reputable companies, and some of their top leaders. He has been a CEO for 25 years, in the venture capital for 5 years, and he has extensive experience. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big believer in when you climb the levels of success, and then you look down the mountain and say, you know what, it's about significance and helping other CEOs climb and achieve great things and hit those pivot points and those blind spots that we all have to be able to level up and be the team leader and be the CEO that we need to be able to build the incredible company and the empire that we all desire. And that's one of the reasons why we have him on. He has worked with incredible companies and CEOs like Metric Lock, Treatum, QuotaPath, Crush Capital, all from CEOs. And so we're so excited about having him on. Please welcome my next guest, the one and only Glenn Gow. Guys, Glenn, I appreciate you being on here, man. How you doing, bud?
Fantastic. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Man, I'm excited about this conversation because what I find so interesting about what you do specifically is there's so many different things that go into holistic aspect of CEOs and leading. And what I always find so interesting is I would imagine one of the things I've always talked with some of my investors and people want to say, hey, I'm in, they probably come to you, Glenn, and say, okay, I just want to talk about the business and how to grow the business and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times it actually comes in internal. You have to look inside, certain traumas, certain experiences, certain things to work on yourself to become who you need to become. And everything else in the business, the finances, the KPIs, those things actually kind of evolve as you internally, you know, um, evolve as well. I'm curious, what is your perspective on that when you're working with some of these top leaders, top individuals, and helping them pivot from just focusing on these KPIs on the external world and start looking inside and how that actually helps them at a magnitude level?
Well, I'll share something with you, Christian, that I learned as a CEO because I had a coach. I was a CEO for 25 years. I had a coach for 17 years, and it was this truly transformational experience for me. And one of the key things my coach said to me is, Glenn, when things go well, you need to pat yourself on the back. You need to celebrate. You need to acknowledge that you made that happen. But when things don't go well, that's your fault. And I did not like hearing that. That was not my perspective. I kept saying, what do you mean it's my fault? I mean, I laid out what they needed to do and I coached them on how to get it done. And my coach was very persistent and said, either you hired the wrong people, or you didn't communicate well enough, or you didn't manage the culture, or you didn't pay attention. But it always comes back to the CEO. And once you recognize that everything that happens emanates from you as the CEO, you recognize that the way you think about the world has a great impact on the way the company is going to perform. And so immediately you shift to, how do I frame things? How do I think about things in a way that are positive, are optimistic, are promoting an idea, as opposed to focusing on just the problems that we have to address every day? Because CEOs love focusing on problems. CEOs are good at solving problems. And yet, we have to help the people who report to us understand that there's a huge opportunity in front of us to grow and to be part of something bigger. So ultimately, a CEO needs to become a leader. And in order for someone to become a leader, you have to create followers. And the way you create followers is you share this vision, you share this optimism, you help people understand that they can get things done that they didn't think they could get done.
One of the things whenever I talk to a lot of individuals, definitely the private equity and the venture capital, where they've, as investors, they understand that you have to what gets you to 8 figures, you have to reestablish that team because that same team that got you to 8 figures is not going to be the same team that got you from 8 figures to $1 billion, valuation, right? And so there's an evolution of the team, but sometimes the CEO Now, there are certain situations where you have to get rid of that CEO, but in a lot of circumstances, that CEO or the founder, they want to evolve as well, right? Up to the right trajectory. And so I want to ask you in regards to like the personal aspect. What do those conversations look like to really, number one, building the trust with your client, making sure that they feel comfortable, be able to feel vulnerable and authentic with you so that you can really get down into the deep roots of what's actually going on and start seeing those patterns and maybe just insecurity or whatever that they struggle with to be able to say, okay, hey, I see now what's going on. And this is the reason why you don't feel like XYZ or whatever it may be. So I'd love for you to just unpack maybe the way you navigate it to make sure that you're building that trust and that authenticity and that vulnerability so that there can be true improvement complete.
Uh, you're absolutely right. Trust is ultimately what's going to enable a CEO to improve. And what I say to any CEO is, look, you're going to have doubts. You're going to have questions about your ability or whether or not the company is going in the right direction, whether or not you have enough funding to make it work, whether or not you can achieve what it is you set out to. You're going to have these doubts. But you can't share the doubts with your board, and you can't share the doubts with your leadership team. That's what I'm here for. In fact, I encourage you to share the doubts with me because they exist, and you need to share them with someone so that we can work through them together. And it's pretty interesting because I would say roughly 20% of CEOs, when I first meet them, they will tell me something in the very first call they've never told anyone ever before in their entire life. And then I know, okay, we're going to really move the needle here because we're dealing with the core issues. And one of the issues that often comes up is, Glenn, I'm not really sure I want to do this. Right? Because when I signed up to be the CEO, it was really fun and we were growing and everything was going well. And now I've had to do layoffs. I have to go raise money in a really difficult environment. I don't get to do the things that I was enjoying when I started the company. And so they're struggling with, why am I actually engaged in this now? And I want them to share that with me if that doubt exists, because we're going to work through that. We're going to come up with a plan to help them get to a place where they're actually enjoying their work they're doing every day and accomplishing what they want to personally and for the company. And so they have to be honest if they're going to move the needle.
I like what you just said there, specifically regarding where sometimes as a CEO, as a founder, you you have to have discernment. You can't go and be authentic and vulnerable, even though that's like a big thing. That's like, saying that in corporate world. But there is also honesty behind it. Say, hey, I'm not able to be authentic fully and vulnerable with my investors and my other executive team. You kind of just have to take it. But then that's where you come in and having that conversation where they are able to pull down their walls because you're not judging them. You just want to fix it. And they're not going to, say, okay, we're not going to, and reinvesting, there's a mutual alignment, which is really interesting. Just by having that mutual alignment. And it sounds like a lot of the individuals, they want to come to you and it seems like they're ready. They're ready to move. Is that correct in regards to like the people you work with? They're like, hey, I know what the problem is, but also are you able to unpack it at a micro level and say, okay, well, we thought it was this XYZ. You came in thinking it was this problem, but actually it had to do something with the way you process or the way you look at things or the way your mental model or your perspective on life.
Well,
I'd love to.
yeah. Sorry to interrupt. No, you're exactly right. First of all, for anyone to work with a coach, I don't care if you're an athlete or a school teacher or a CEO, you have to have the mindset that there's a reason every great athlete has a coach. It isn't because they're not already at the top of their game. It's because a coach helps them become even better. You need that mentality in order to get the most out of a coaching relationship. And you said something interesting. Ultimately, I think CEOs understand that there is a problem or a challenge, but they don't quite understand what's going on. And that's perfectly natural. And the reason that happens is that CEOs in particular have neural pathways in their brain that I call success patterns. These are things they learned either as a small child or they get from their oldest part of their brain called the amygdala, or they learn throughout their career. They have certain patterns of things that they do that help them succeed. And this is fantastic. This is how you become a CEO. And they work until they don't. And when they don't work, often most of us, CEOs included, get stuck. They get stuck because we're not quite sure, why isn't that success pattern working anymore? My job is to help identify what those success patterns are, help the CEO understand that these exist and they work most of the time, but then recognize we have to grow now. Now it's time to add to these success patterns, to create new ones, to reframe the way we're operating in the world. See, there's this interesting thing in venture capital that I discovered, that roughly 60% of CEOs get fired within a 5-year period. And I said, okay, why is that? Well, the simple answer is because they're not growing the company fast enough. Okay, that makes sense. But if you go a level deeper and ask, why isn't the CEO growing the company faster? It's because they themselves are not scaling. In other words, they've hit their peak given the success patterns that they bring with them, and now they need new ones. So I help to identify what those success patterns are, and maybe even the ones that are missing, and give them new tools, new capabilities that they can step out in and become better at in order for them to scale themselves personally.
Let's talk a little bit about this at a more smaller aspect, because when you work with someone, I would imagine they probably see and they feel experiences and they feel like, okay, we're moving things, we're seeing that. I feel it in my life, like the things you talk about. But then there comes, maybe it might be 18 months, maybe it might be 24 months later, but there comes a point where it almost feels like a plateau, right? Where it just feels like it's a small incremental, but that's where like it's the difference between the Olympian and the other Olympian, right? It's just the 0.0001% time difference, and that's what makes the difference between a winner and loser, right? And so I love to get to that point right there when you see, okay, we see that up to the right trajectory, boom, explosion, they get excited, they get fun, we see some momentum, but then when it feels like that plateau, and I think everybody hits it, just different
Yep.
times, different
Yep.
situations. I'd love for you to just kind of talk a bit about that, because that's what I always find so interesting about leadership and running your company and scaling and doing really anything.
So we'll stay in the realm of CEOs for now. But you're right, it applies almost anywhere. So what typically happens is that a CEO will begin to feel frustration and overwhelm. Okay, frustration because things are not going the way they expected them to, and overwhelmed because the list of important things to get done seems just too much. And so what I typically will hear from a CEO is some form of, why aren't these people doing exactly what I need them to do? Meaning all the people in the company. And what the CEO then, well, what I will help the CEO recognize at that point is that this has to do with the way you as a CEO think and communicate in order to get people to align behind you. And it was working before, but now we need different things. We need different ways of operating. Maybe we have to bring in new technology. We're going after new markets. We're going to hire a different set of people. And when the CEO has that frustration, what happens is it's quite interesting. The CEO doesn't wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I realize my success patterns aren't working anymore. I need to do something different." I help them understand that we have to do something different, and I give them tools. So a very simple tool, I'll just use a very, very simple example, is called OKRs, the Objectives and Key Results Framework. Very popular in Silicon Valley. It's something that Google uses to drive their company. And just as an example of one tool, I will give this tool to the CEO and show him how to use it and say, look, it's just a tool, but the purpose of the tool is to break through the way you were managing before and enable you to manage in a different way, and to recognize that you need to align people behind you and your vision so that they are actually executing against the most important things in the company. That's one tool. Another tool might be culture. So I had one of my CEOs, I called him a black belt in culture. And he told me, he said, "Glenn, we're growing fast. And I noticed the other day, there was a person, this is back before COVID, there's a person in the office, and that was a new employee, and I don't know who they are. And there was a panic situation. Like, well, I mean, we're growing so fast that I can't keep track of everybody that's coming into the company. And how do I know that new employee is actually doing what I want them to do? I don't know. And so he said, I'm going to focus on culture and values. And I'm going to communicate to my leadership team the things that are important so that they then communicate to their team the things that are important so that everybody who works here understands what to do. And so the magic moment is that new employee has to make a decision. And no one else is there to help them make that decision. How do they make that decision? If they have been taught and believe in and understand the values of the company, as the CEO, I'm now confident they're going to make a good decision. But if they don't know what our values are, they're going to bring their old values from their old company and probably do the wrong thing. So that's another tool. So there are many, many tools like this. And I want my CEOs to get used to them, to practice with them. And it's hard, right? Because we're learning something new. But you have to be willing to take on that learning and say, I am here to become even better and to grow. I call it compound interest. This is what happened with my coach. I kept getting just a little bit better every time we met, a little bit better. And then eventually I'd look over my shoulder and say, those are problems. I could easily handle those problems. Bring on the big ones now.
That's incredible. And so it's just these small, minuscule things, but over a large kind of quantity of focused projects and so forth, and tools and resources integrating it. When you're looking at working with these individuals, obviously everybody is so contextually different, right? Some individuals are really good, charismatic or whatever. Some are maybe just different leadership, like you were talking about, managing style. Some are very familiar with, they have to rely on a team, et cetera. And so there's a lot of dynamics that I always find so interesting. That's why I think it's so fun, working and talking with people like yourself, because it is so contextual. Could you tell us of a story where, someone, they were very, very reluctant to work on that weakness for whatever reason, right? Maybe they just was their ego, their pride, whatever it was. And it was kind of you had to kind of really string them along a little bit and then help them kind of blossom. And then they started realizing, okay, I need to work on this weakness. I'd love for you to just share a little bit of the story. You don't have to share the name or the company, et cetera, but maybe just someone that you work with where they were reluctant. And because I think we all are, right, at some point, right, where there's just a little bit of pride, that ego. I don't really want to do this, but I got to, because you need to grow to the next level, and you're the only one that's holding you back. So I'd love for you to just talk on that a little bit.
Sure. One of the more difficult things for humans, but CEOs in particular, is having what I call difficult conversations. So on average, a CEO has between 6 and 8 people reporting to them. And on average, 1 or 2 of those people is not working out. And whenever I say that to a CEO, they instantly go, oh, I know who those 2 people are. And so then we begin to probe. And we say, well, what are your thoughts about this 1 or 2 people who are not working out? And they realize that one of them has to go. But they're dragging their feet. And they know they're dragging their feet. And they know it's not the right thing to do. And yet they're worried about having those difficult conversations to get to a place where that person needs to be replaced. And there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, this is particularly relevant you used an example earlier, in a scaling company. The people who are good for a company at 10 million are not good for the company that's 100 million. And as the company grows, there's turnover. And it's natural turnover. It's okay to have that turnover. But CEOs are often reluctant to enable that turnover to happen. Why? Maybe there's somebody who's been with the company for a long time and they're a great person. But ultimately, the responsibility of the CEO is to help the company succeed. And so if the person isn't going to be part of that company, or shouldn't be part of that company going forward, the CEOs drag their feet. So I begin a conversation with them, and we pretty quickly, in a very short period of time, will realize we have to make a decision. Either we help this person get a different job inside the company, which is rare, but possible, or we let them know we need to transition. And I give them the understanding that no one ever said, I let go of this person too soon. Everyone always says, I took too long to let go of this person. And so then I'm encouraging the CEO, because I'll typically meet with the CEO once a week. I'm encouraging them to take action between now and the next time to move forward with dealing with that difficult issue. And now I'm holding them accountable. So now they know everything they've been hoping to not do, they now have to go do because they know it's the right thing. They've just been reluctant to do it. And now next time we meet, we're going to talk about what kind of conversation did you have? What's the plan to help this person move on?
I'm so glad you brought that up, and I love talking about this stuff because it's kind of the stuff that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but it is the conversation, right? It is those those tough, difficult situations. So I want to ask you, and I know this is all contextual depending upon obviously the company, the situation, the employee, all of the leadership, etc. But how do you work with those individuals to have those tough conversations? Do you help them just kind of, kind of back and forth a little bit and just say, okay, well, what are you going to say? What are you going to do? Or is it just more getting clarity and saying, okay, well, you've given them 6 months. You've mentioned this to them numerous times and not hitting their metrics on a quarterly basis, whatever the situation is. And you've given them enough leeway, but now it's more of time to, kind of eradicate that. But I'm saying that really not in just the context of the leadership team, but also your investors, right? Your board members, right? Having those tough, difficult conversations because some investors will come and say, "Hey, you're not meeting those KPIs. What's going on? What's happening?" And you have to, explain and say, "Well, this is what's going on." And you don't want to make an excuse, but you have to say, "Well, I take the ownership, et cetera." So, how do you help them navigate it? Is it more of just a cordial, empathetical way, or is it more of, okay, you know what? I'm going to be very direct. I'm going to be very, definitive and confident in where I'm going. I just love for you to talk a little bit about that because I find just it's human psychology, human nature, and
Right.
navigating the relationships of tough conversations.
Right. Well, let's talk about the employee situation. So someone who reports directly to a CEO. We can talk about the board separately. It's a different kind of conversation. Happy to talk about that as well. So what CEOs are worried, they're concerned, they're afraid about how someone's going to react. They're afraid that they're going to be angry or upset or maybe even vindictive. And so there's a real reasonable fear that some people might be like that. But it's also, remember what I brought up earlier, it's also a question of, is it possible that it's me, the CEO, that is a problem
Mm.
and not the individual? Well, it is possible. So if we just ask a simple question, why is that person not getting done what I want them to get done? What I encourage CEOs to do before we get to a termination conversation is to become curious. Okay, so instead of saying, Christian, why didn't you get that thing done that we talked about? I say, don't use the word why. The word why creates a defensive posture from the person being asked the question. They are there to answer the question, why didn't they do that? And they become defensive and you don't get to the real issue. A better question or way to phrase this is, help me understand how you were thinking about that. Now, what's amazing about that shift from why to help me understand is that roughly 20-30% of the time, that person had a good reason. They've thought through that something else was a higher priority. Maybe they had a customer situation to deal with. You don't know because you're not being curious if you just ask why. They get defensive. Instead, help me understand why you didn't, or not why. Help me understand how you were thinking about that. And you learn that often you didn't communicate effectively and they were thinking about it in a certain way that makes perfect sense. So by becoming curious, you begin to understand, is it my communication that has caused this issue, or is it a competence issue with the individual? I need to understand that. If it's a competence issue, then we have another gate to go through, which I'll talk about in a moment. But first, you have to look at yourself. And by being curious, you will learn the truth. Now, on the competence side, let's say I ask them, help me understand how you were thinking about this, and they're just thinking about it wrong from my perspective. Okay, it's just like, no, customer comes first. That maybe that's one of our values. They should have known customer comes first. So now you have to ask yourself, this employee, are they a keeper or not? Meaning, is this someone that I want to keep in the organization or not? It's a really, really important question to ask yourself. Because if they're not a keeper, then you're going to have to have that difficult conversation with them and help them understand that there's a better place for them to be working than here. But if they are a keeper, there's someone who has great potential, 9 times out of 10, they're doing a great job. You have to ask yourself, am I willing to invest my time and effort in getting them up to a better level? Because you can't just hope that they're going to get to a better level. You have to invest in the individual. And that's a real eye-opener for some CEOs because they realize, no, actually, this person is great 9 times out of 10. They just frustrate me to death 1 time out of 10. And I am willing to make the investment to help them understand how to get to a higher level. Okay, now, and the third conversation is, the CEO, I'm pretty convinced this person isn't going to work out. So we want to have an honest conversation. So a great way to address this is to sit down with the person and say, how do you think things are going? Now, it's amazing because most people understand. If they're not doing a great job, they understand they're not doing a great job. And many people will acknowledge that. And many people will say, I'm kind of lost. I don't think I'm performing the way I really should. I'm worried about my job here. And when you hear that from someone, now you can have an honest conversation. Now, if they're delusional, Christian, if they're like, oh man, I've never done better, and I hope I'm getting a huge bonus, then you got to immediately take them down and help them understand they're not. But that's pretty rare, actually.
It's so good to hear this and the way you're navigating this, and just even what you just talked about in regards to fear and getting clarity on that. Just at the beginning, saying, okay, what is the worst case situation? And then you start realizing, oh, I can handle that. Like if that's the worst, like, oh, that's all right. It's just more like the unknown and just getting clarity on that. And then, like you mentioned, in all three of those pillars in regards to how to navigate and have those direct conversations. And I love just that differentiation of, hey, help me understand, how do you see this, and asking the right questions and out of curiosity more so than this judgment, if you will. I love that curiosity aspect because that makes a world of difference. Because one of the things I always found interesting is that you say something, and I've seen this in relationships and as well as in just the business world, and they interpret it differently than what you thought. And so then if there's not clarity, it's just more like, okay, well, let me ask you, what did you hear me just say just now? Okay, and making sure that they get it and so forth, and it eliminates a lot of that. But like you mentioned, also, I mean, at the end of the day, if you have them on your team and they're not performing, you're holding your whole team back, but also you're holding that person back because they could actually do something better in a different job, et cetera, that may be more beneficial for them. And so it's kind of it's just a pre-frame. I want to also ask you, when you're having these conversations with CEOs, and you've had enormous amount of conversations, and you're working collaboratively with a lot of top level people, and they got management, they got stress, they got time management, they got a lot of this stuff. And what I found interesting is when you work and you find and you research, a lot of the most high performing people, they focus on just a very few solidified projects, right? And not just, I'm talking about business. I'm also talking about like their own personal, right? They are very, very adamant about having a holistic approach. Hey, I want to make sure I'm going and spending time with my family. I want to have some mental health. I want to have these, right? It becomes very prevalent in a lot of top level CEOs and high performers. And I've seen that all across the board. But one of the biggest things that they focus on is very, very limited, 1 or 2 or 3 things that they're just relentless about. Do you help them walk through that a little bit and getting clarity on, okay, hey, out of all the commitments, are you we got to eliminate all those commitments. We got to work with your team to be able to obviously, remove all those things from your calendar so that then you can focus on what you're truly here on this planet. Be an orchestra, right? And a conductor, if you will.
That's right.
Is that the kind of perspective or the way you think about it?
Well, you described it well. And the challenge comes from the fact that I'm dealing with the CEO. And invariably, the CEO is ambitious. Invariably, the CEO knows how to get a lot of stuff done. That's how they got to be the CEO. So I had to learn myself when I was a CEO this experience. I was working with my coach and we were going through my to-do list, and I'm very ambitious. There are a lot of things I want to do in life. I probably had 17 things on my list of things I wanted to get done in the following year. And she said, Glenn, you have to pick 3. And I was very unhappy about that because I wanted 17. She said, you have to pick 3. And she said, here's why. You're not going to get any of those 17 done if you focus on 17. But if you pick the 3 most important ones, you're going to get those done. And maybe, just maybe, you'll have time to get 4 and 5 done. But the prioritization is what becomes critical, because you actually can't get all of those things done. This is true of any company, any individual. You can't get all the things done that you really want to get done. So you have to understand how to prioritize what is most important in this next quarter or this next week or this next year, and focus on a small number so that you can actually accomplish them and then move on to the next. And it's okay to create a parking lot of great things you want to get done. Numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7. It's okay to create that and know they're sitting there. And they're actually, for me, they're motivators to say, oh, I actually want to get that done, but not until I get the most important things done can I go do that. Maybe it's a fun project. And so prioritization is a real struggle for CEOs, and yet it's a game changer. When we say we're going to focus on these 3 things for the next quarter, we get them done. And it's amazing when you get things done. Now you feel a sense of accomplishment. You feel like not only did I get them done, but they were the most important, most valuable things for me to get done. And now I can move on to things that are less valuable, less important, because I have time to go do that.
Speaking on this, so focusing on those top 3 things, I've also kind of understood that, because one of the things I think a lot of CEOs and a lot of just high-performing people do very excellently is they're relentless at it. However, though, that sometimes they are so focused and so dialed in that everything else kind of falls to the wayside a little bit. Whether it's a good or bad thing, like you mentioned, they're high performers. They're able to achieve and do a lot of great things and succeed at a high level. And one of the things I've discovered about myself is I have to be very intentional with having a day or 2 days to be able to just really just relax, not be on the computer, not doing XYZ things. And the way I thought about it, because there was a research, a lot of it that says sometimes by stepping back and pulling yourself away and doing other things, and it'll actually allow that creative juices so that you can actually look at a problem differently when you come back to it. And there's been a lot of research associated with that. However, though, even though we may know that at a logical level, sometimes it's almost like as high performers, we got to work, we got to build, we got to do this email, we got to do. I mean, there's all these urgent things, right? Definitely when you're scaling and so forth. And so some listeners, some people that are listeners, they're probably sitting there going, well, that's awesome. You can focus on 2 or 3 things, but I'm at this level where I don't have the team, I don't have the establishment, I don't have all that stuff yet. And so I need to, send out the emails. I need to be customer service sometimes. I need to do product development. I need to do the marketing. I need to, hire new salespeople, right? That's just the reality, definitely when you're in that pivot point. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, when you're having these dialogues and these conversations when they are in that midst of all that shit, right? How do you help them through that a little bit to make sure that they are able to say, hey, you know what? I can take a day off in 2 days because, one, it's actually very important because it increases my productivity, increases my energy levels, and so forth, making sure that I do have, enough energy,
right,
to run the race.
Right. Well, I think I heard 2 things in there. One is, I'll call it personal time, and we'll talk about that. And the second is, sometimes I feel like I have to get everything done, that I don't have time for any personal time. So let's talk about personal time first. So personal time is absolutely critical. It's almost like sleep. We need time to let our brain repair itself. And everybody's different. And I encourage people to find their own way of calming themselves down or enjoying themselves or doing something completely outside of work. So for me, it's adventure sports, whether it's mountain biking or wing foiling or doing something like that. I go off and I do that and I come back refreshed. I also encourage CEOs to meditate. Sometimes they look at me pretty funny when I ask them to meditate. How am I going to find time to meditate? Well, it turns out that studies have shown you can meditate as little as 12 minutes a day and get tremendous value out of meditation. And one of the reasons I bring it up is when we are feeling pressure, when we are feeling like I'm never going to get everything done, counterintuitively, by investing time in meditation, it puts things in perspective for you. And perspective matters a lot. And we realize I actually don't have to get everything done. It's just that I'm pushing myself to get everything done, or I'm feeling outside pressure to get things done, or I haven't managed expectations well. That's a big area we could talk about. And so I am not even happy doing all the things that I'm doing. And I'm not going to be very productive if I'm not happy while I'm doing these things. So finding personal time, and frankly, the best way to do this is you block out time on your calendar. So if you saw my calendar, you'd see these big chunks of time where no one can meet with me. Well, that's because I'm maybe going for a bike ride, or I'm going off wing foiling, or whatever I'm going to do, because I need that time. But boy, am I going to work hard when I come back, but I'm also going to be highly productive when I come back and I work in those chunks of time that I've set aside to do work, because I've balanced my life. So I'm always focused on how do I help CEOs perform at a higher level. And I'm so glad you brought it up, because counterintuitively, spending time in nature, spending time with your family, adventure sports, or meditation, or some combination of the above, it actually enable you to perform at a higher level when it comes time to roll up your sleeves and get that work done.
This is something I had to learn tremendously when I was younger. I remember numerous times when I would be working in the office, and I feel guilty for not being able to spend time with my family. And so I'd spend time with my family, but then I'd be, I'm on my phone or something and feel guilty for not working. Right? There's this constant. I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? Right? And asking these questions, and I really had to be very intentional, and saying, okay, well, I just choose to enjoy the time with my family, and that's it. Right. And then I choose to focus on work when I need to focus on work. And it's just become, there's a lot of just internal things. And what I want to ask you, because you mentioned this as well, and I want to, double click on it, setting the right expectations. And this is actually something that I found so unique, but I'd love for you to get your perspective, and let's kind of unpack this a little bit.
Well, so you mentioned the board a couple of times. So let's talk about managing the board. Or managing anyone's, not everybody has a board. So let's just say, we want to manage anyone's expectations. So if I make a commitment to you, I'm going to think very carefully about what are my odds of actually fulfilling on that commitment. So I'm going to change my commitment. So simple example, Christian, we're going to have dinner. Let's get there. We'll have dinner at 7:00. Okay, I'm going to go check out Google Maps. Notice it's going to take me an hour to get there, and I'm going to leave not at 6:00. I'm going to leave at 5:45, because I want to get there early if there's traffic, or if there's traffic, I don't want to get there late. I'm going to manage your expectations that I'm going to be there at 7:00. And so I'm going to change my behavior to ensure I fulfill on my promise. Another way to think about this is, if I'm managing the board, okay, we're going to hit $1 million in annual recurring revenue this quarter. Maybe that's what I say internally. But when I say it to the board, I'm going to say, well, we're going to target 900,000 in annual recurring revenue for this quarter, because I'm very confident I can make 900,000. I don't want to promise them $1 million, because that's a stretch goal. So I'm managing their expectations, and I want to overperform. I always want to achieve what I committed to. And so I lower expectations of people outside, or I set up myself so that, like in the dinner example, I know I'm going to be there at 7:00.
See, it's so beautiful in the way you just said that, because I mean, it's like an elementary kind of thing, but we mess that up all the time, right? And making sure that we, really are very clear on that, and making sure that not only are we able, because I like what you said on the probability as well. Hey, there's a high probability, like 80-90% chance that we'll get a 900,000 ARR. Cool. And it's about with $1 million ARR, maybe a 50-40% 40%, right? So it's like,
Right.
well, what am I going to say? And just the probability aspect of it. And I think that's just so important to understand that also. And one of the things I actually found very interesting, and I want to ask you on this, Glenn, I actually remember there was numerous times when they were like be unconscious, right? Definitely when I was like, 27, 28, 24, I was like, oh, I got to be a bajillionaire by XYZ, right? And it was this unconscious thing. I had to have all these things in place and then if I wasn't there, I'd get frustrated, I'd get annoyed because it was this false expectation instead of and I was like, why am I putting this expectation? And then it would facilitate an emotion, which is a negative emotion that doesn't
Right.
facilitate growth or optimal kind of, return, et cetera. It was just like, depression and frustration, annoyance and,
That's right.
anger and all that stuff. I want to ask you on that also because it is in the business world. I understand it's important to have constraints, right? Be able to have goals, be able to accomplish them, be able to drive, but also acknowledge the journey and enjoy the journey aspect as well. And say,
Right.
hey, you know what? Yes, we are driving. Yes, we are moving, but there are certain controllables that I cannot control. And there are certain things that I can control naturally in business and just setting the right expectation, but so that you're able to facilitate obviously optimal growth.
So I'll tell a story about one of my CEOs. At the end of the quarter, he said, Glenn, we only achieved 97% of our goal. And my CEO was upset because they only achieved 97% of the goal. This is the goal he set for the company, revenue goal. And I said, you just had the best quarter you ever had. And you're focused on the 3% you didn't get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, let's step back and reframe our thinking here. You should celebrate that you just had the best quarter in the company's history. And you should acknowledge that you made that happen. And 3% in the scheme of things isn't important. In fact, I want you to go into the next quarter with gratitude for what you accomplished, not a negative framing that you failed to meet your goal. And why do I want that? Because you're going to be more powerful if your framing is, I accomplished the best quarter we ever accomplished. If you go into the next quarter saying we failed, which is exactly how he was thinking, guess what? Every employee in the company is going to feel that negativity from you. And they're going to wonder where is this coming from? Why is he angry or short or untrusting or whatever the case may be? And they won't really even understand where you're coming from, but they won't be motivated to follow you if you're approaching the world that way. If you stand up in front of the company and say, we had the best quarter we've ever had. This is an amazing team. We're the right company at the right time. We can accomplish just fantastic things going forward. That's how you create followers. And so it's a matter of perspective and how you then communicate that perspective to others.
How often do you have to do that and help your clients reframe? Because I would imagine because it's a win or a loss. It's a win or a loss. And it's not sitting there going, okay, let's actually build some context around what we have been able to accomplish and what you have been able to accomplish. How often do you have to do that? I'm curious.
Almost always. And so look, I've had CEOs who beat their goal for the quarter. Okay, they beat the goal and they're like, yeah, but we only beat it by 10%. I have to ask them, look, we got to step back and celebrate. And I'll say, are you taking your family out to dinner to celebrate? And they'll look at me like, oh, I never thought of that. Wow, we're making a lot of money. We're successful. We're doing things well, and yet so CEOs don't often acknowledge what they've accomplished. They don't often celebrate their successes. And what I do every single day, and I ask my CEOs to do every day, is create a gratitude list. Mm-hmm. What are the things that you're grateful for this morning when you wake up that are in your life? If you open the day by talking about, here are the things I'm grateful for, your perspective on the day will be, I'm in a world of abundance and I can get amazing things done and I have a fantastic, wonderful, healthy life. If you don't do that, you're going to wake up in the morning and say, oh, I have all these problems to address. Which day would you rather open up to? I want to tell you a quick story, a family story. So I have 2 adult children, and one of them sends to my wife every day a text. Here are the things I'm grateful for. 3 things. Every day. I'm jealous. I think it's fantastic that they do this. So one day my wife had a bad day, and she writes back and she says, I don't have anything to be grateful for. And my son writes back to her what I thought was the most brilliant thing. He said, now you owe me 10 things that you were grateful for today. And of course she can find 10 things to be grateful for. We always can. It's a mind shift. It's a reframing that enables us to be powerful if we look at the world from the place of what we have and what we're grateful for.
Beautiful story, man. Beautiful story. And I actually find it on a personal aspect. I literally can feel myself when I get in this anger, this frustration, those negative emotions, jealousy, envy, whatever it is. And then I have to be very intentional in my head and say, okay, I'm grateful, and really just meditate on all the things that are just a small, minuscule things, be able to listen to music, watch and see all the colors in the sky and all these small, small, intricate things. But it's interesting how all of a sudden I do that and I literally can feel the difference just on an energy aspect of it. Glenn, I want to ask you this. So this is something I've actually studied, and I want to get your perspective on this. When you're running a CEO, I was listening to an incredible documentary about Brian Armstrong, one that runs Coinbase, and how, and I think we're seeing this a little bit more. We're CEOs. We love business. We want to go out there, build businesses. We want to go and impact people. But then sometimes you have to deal with social justice issues, right? Maybe political issues. And this is not going to be a political conversation, but as a leader, sometimes you have to share certain things, and you are going to rub people the wrong way, if you will, rub them the wrong way. And so my question is the importance of self-identity, high self-esteem, and high self-confidence as the leader, and making sure that you are grounded as the leader, because obviously there are going to be naysayers, right? There's always going to be individuals that will want to watch you fall and fail, right? Definitely we need to hit those top caliber things. And you got to be holistic with, hey, I know who I am, even though you may call me XYZ, right? As a leader. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that, because I think sometimes a lot of leaders, we'd like to put on this posture, right? And this perspective that we're always, we're confident, we're certain, this and that. But at the end of the day, behind closed doors, when we take off our armor, we are, and we're naked with the ones that we love, metaphorically. We're not really too confident. Sometimes we're not too certain. Right. Our identity is questioned. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about that, and maybe the work that you do with some of your CEOs.
Well, this is a very tricky area, and I don't encourage CEOs to get out on the public stage about challenging issues in politics, in society. I'll give you an example. So one of my CEOs is Israeli, and before October 7th, he was telling me that a lot of employees were protesting what was happening in the government. And he said, okay, what kind of role do I want to play here? And he said, it isn't my job to tell them whether they should be against what the government wants to do or for what the government wants to do. What I need to do is give them guardrails and say, okay, if you want to go protest, you can do that in the confines of our PTO policy. You can't just leave and go protest. And so he gave them guardrails and let people go if they wanted to go. This is essentially the way they would spend their vacation. He said, but the bigger challenge is, how do I enable them to work well with the people who didn't want to protest, who stayed at work and actually believe in what the government is doing? He said, that's my job, is to enable people who have different points of view to work together. And so I think the danger in a CEO is in taking one point of view is that people who don't want to follow that point of view may not want to work for that CEO. And so you take a real risk. And so I believe my Israeli CEO is quite brilliant in saying, I can't control, I don't want to control better how people think about important issues in the country, but I want them to recognize that all of us are not going to agree, but that doesn't mean we can't work well together. Mm-hmm. Now, another thing, now since October 7th, it's a real struggle being in Israel. And he said, look, whether we like what's happening or not isn't the point. The point is, I need to ensure that my employees are working. There are things happening all around them that are emotionally tearing them apart, but I can't have them do that in the workplace. So I need to create a place where we can still get back to work, but we still have the rest of our lives, which might be emotional and challenging, and I'll support that. So I have to give them room. And so I think that's a more effective approach than saying, I like this particular point, and this is what we as a company believe in, because I think you're going to lose a lot of people when you do that.
I love that the way you navigated that, and also walking through that and talking through that. You're exactly right, because at the end of the day, this mission over here for the business is maybe something, the mission and the vision and the ethos is totally different than this situation. And like you said, you have both of those kind of collaborative individuals in your ecosystem, and so you got to make sure, hey, how are we going to build this synergy to be able to accomplish the business's mission and so forth. And as a leader, you don't want to go into the one camp or the other, because it's not helping facilitate it. Coming back on double clicking on the leader's identity, as well as their confidence and their high self-esteem.
Yeah.
I remember specifically, there was a time when I was working with my team and so forth, and I went into a meeting, and I just had a few bad meetings, kind of back to back, and it was just kind of hitting me and boom, boom, boom. And instead of, taking a refresher, you get some water, whatever, I went into the next meeting and I was just kind of down. And it was so interesting. Okay, Glenn, the team felt it. The team felt it. My confidence, my certainty, my definitive. And the thing is actually one of the leaders, he pulled me aside and said, Christian, are you doing all right? Are we sure we're going to be able to hit these metrics? Like, he was uncertain. And then I had to just real quick, no, we are going to do that. We're 100%. I apologize if it came across that way. We're going to, we're definitely doing it. And what I found so interesting is that, like I just mentioned, they could feel the uncertainty as the leader. And so sometimes you want to make sure, yes, you want to be authentic and vulnerable, but also you want to have that confidence, that certainty, that definitive answer, and say, this is where we're going, this is what's happening. You want to make sure you always are on point, because they can feel it, like you mentioned earlier on, where it can be disseminated. So I just want to ask you on regarding the importance of that leader, and then making sure that confidence, that certainty, their identity is in place for that, that next evolution of their business.
Yeah. So I think it's important to distinguish about vulnerability. Okay. I believe vulnerability is actually a powerful aspect of being a CEO, but in the right context. I believe it's powerful to be vulnerable when a CEO acknowledges that they made a mistake. And the reason you do this is, well, first of all, you actually have to make a mistake. Okay, you make a mistake, but by acknowledging that, people say, wow, that person's human. They're not perfect. And maybe if someday I make a mistake, because I'm dealing with a human who makes mistakes, I'll get a little forgiveness here. And so followers love when leaders acknowledge, hey, I made a mistake. So that's when you want to be vulnerable. Now, pointing forward, though, we want to be confident. We don't want to say, well, I'm not really sure if we should go climb that mountain. Maybe we should go down this river instead. That's not going to cut it. So this has to do with preparation, understanding your mission, your vision, your goals, and being really, really, really clear about those. And then walking into that room with a high level of confidence. This is true whether it's your leadership team or it's your board. So the posture, the way you enter, the way you speak is absolutely critical. Now, let me talk about something parallel to this, which is the way I describe the role of a CEO is that you are like a big rock in a small pond. And when you walk into a room, you drop the rock, or you get on a Zoom call, you drop the rock in the pond. And the CEO never pays attention to the fact that there are a lot of ripples happening in the pond. But every employee is watching. Did Christian furrow his brow in a certain way? When he does that, that means he's not sure. Or did he say something about something that I don't know, that concerns me now? Or they're listening, they're watching, they're paying enormous attention to everything the CEO is doing. Why? Because the CEO is the most important person in the room. They're the person who, if the CEO is not confident about our future, should I take that call from a recruiter? Right? Should I start looking for something else? Do I really believe? If the CEO doesn't believe, and so look, one of my CEOs said he was going up in front of a big analyst audience, okay, an audience following the company. And he said, okay, here's what we do. I huddle with my team. And then before I walk on stage, I say, it's showtime. And he gets up and he's a confident person. He's speaking to the topics that he knows are most important to the audience. And he's keeping those self-doubts for another time, maybe for a conversation with me. But because the spotlight is on the CEO and you're that big rock in the pond and you create ripples, you have to be highly aware of how you communicate, how you come across. And you want to ensure that those ripples are positive ones, not negative ones.
Definitely, definitely. And I love that what you just said as well. It's that just that mindset of the way you think about this when you are walking on that. It's showtime. It's showtime, and you got to present it and you got to think it because you are. It's people can feel that unconsciously, and it's so interesting to me. And that's one of the things I've always I just found so unique. Glenn, I really appreciate you being on here, man. Just talking about this. We got a few more minutes with you, and I apologize for taking so long, but I find these conversations so interesting. But I want to bring this up as well because you mentioned and you're big on this AI stuff, and I think it's so important. But also, you really help these businesses not just thinking about okay, how is AI going to take these jobs, but also how do we build our business more effective and efficient, right? Simplifying certain processes, systems, and leveraging and integrating into it. And you mentioned this on your LinkedIn post. When discussing artificial intelligence, many people express concern about AI replacing humans in the workforce, which I just mentioned. There's that, but there is AI in the workplace. One of the goals of implementing AI strategy is to make the workplace safer and more efficient than ever before. And I'd love for you to, because you mentioned this on this beautiful Forbes article talking a little bit about this, I'd love for you to just help me, really just have that conversation. Like what kind of conversations are you having with the CEO to say, okay, hey, we see the importance of it, we see the effectiveness of it, and making sure that we are integrating and optimizing our business, our structure, our processes, everything like that.
So first, I want every CEO to acknowledge that AI is going to have an impact on their company. It doesn't matter what you're doing, there's going to be an impact. And it's going to happen inside your company, or it's going to happen with one of your competitors. Importantly, this is the biggest technology disruption we've ever had. And here's why. It's because every day AI gets just a little bit better than it was before. And sometimes it does it all by itself. And so this change is happening so fast that if your competitor climbs on board and your competitor gets good at using the tools available to them using AI, they can gain a lead that's insurmountable and put you out of business. I actually believe that in certain industries, there will emerge a single winner because AI will enable that to happen. So what I encourage CEOs to do is I love telling stories about what my other CEOs do. So one of my CEOs came up with a brilliant idea. He said, he got up in front of an all hands meeting and he said, okay, I have a 3-week challenge for everybody in the company. Every single person in the company has to use AI during the next 3 weeks. I don't care how you use it. I don't care what tool you use. I don't care what the outcome looks like. You have to use it, and then you have to report to your management what you learned. Because we're going to learn the good things. We're going to learn some of the bad things. We're going to learn about the capabilities and the things it can't do. but I need every single person in the company to understand that they have tools available to them to use, and they can learn something that will enable us as a company to now start to think more strategically about how does AI fit into our future.
Mhm.
And he gave everybody the freedom to fail. That was what was beautiful about it. And he said, I'm mandating this. You can't say, oh, I'm the receptionist, I'm too busy or whatever. Can't come up with a reason to use it. No, everybody has to use it. And the beauty of that is once people start to use tools that are available to them, they realize there's a capability out there that they hadn't really touched before. And they start to think about how this can really have a positive impact. And we can also start to think about how to put guardrails around this to ensure that it is a positive impact and not a negative impact. But it's a cultural change that's required, because this is going to infiltrate everything we do. So this work you and I are doing right now, there are companies right now that are creating summaries of podcasts and video podcasts so that maybe I don't have time to listen to this whole conversation between Christian and Glenn, but I can get this really cool summary with some of the highlights, and AI is going to do all of that work, and it's going to save people time. We're all going to win if we adopt these tools, and many people are going to lose if we don't. And the best phrase I've heard so far is that you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to a person who's using AI.
Well said. Well said. And I think it's so cool how they crowdsourced it and said, hey, instead of that top-down approach, it said, hey, start using XYZ AI kind of, thing. They said, hey, go and test a whole bunch, right? And then, once we get the data and seeing what's working, what's not, and what's efficient, what's not, then we can start implementing or not implementing. Like you mentioned, I love what you said in guardrails, building the right boundaries to put in place to make sure, okay, hey, how can we systemize this, streamline this, process this? And it's so interesting. There was numerous times where I've seen it drastically. I mean, literally just collapse the time frame. We used to do a lot of the snippets and stuff like that. I had someone manually go through the snippet and the YouTube long-term stuff and find the small, like 60-second snippets. And now AI is doing that instantaneously. I can upload it, boom. And before that took them maybe a day and a half to get the, one amazing stuff for 1 hour, 2 hours or something like that. But again, we've seen this constantly, Glenn. That's what I wanted to bring this up, because just how you're able to help, navigate these companies and these resources and saying, hey, how are we going to integrate this and simplify, and the efficiencies? I'm seeing amazing margins on these companies now, massive, OpEx drastically decreased because now they're able to leverage a lot. You can do a lot more with less, and it's just a beautiful thing. Glenn, I really appreciate you being on here, man, and just sharing your incredible background, your experience, your expertise, the people that you're working with at a very high level, different levels. I mean, you're talking multi-billion-dollar companies to the mid cap to small cap, 8-figure companies and so forth, and these leaders and CEOs, and helping them navigate these very tumultuous times, right? Whether it may be personal, whether it be also the external side of things, and how it actually is a very direct correlation between their own growth and the company's growth. And that's what I find so fun, and having conversations with you, Glenn. For those that want to reach out to you, don't want to ask a little bit more questions because they're like, holy shit, I need someone like Glenn to be able to keep me accountable, right? To level up my game, and definitely in really navigating 2024 and 2025 and the future. And for those that just want to, also learn a little bit more about the amazing content you have, how do they reach out to you, my man?
It's very simple. You just find my name on Google, and my website is glenngow.com, GLENNGOW.com. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with people who want to consider a relationship with a CEO coach.
Definitely. And he's very tapped out. I mean, he's got a ton of clients already. And so I was just asking him offline, and I was like, oh my gosh, how many hours, whatever. And it's just incredible. But also you always find time to, work with the right people. And guys, to make it very simple, I'll put all those links in the description: his LinkedIn, his website, as well as his other content, his YouTube channel as well. Glenn, I really appreciate being on here big time and just sharing your background. That really means a lot. And, we'll have to have you on again, because there's always things that are evolving, always things that are moving. Guys, that is my friend, the one and only high performance coach and CEO coach, Glenn Gow. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.